opinions expressed here on my own.
So sorry, what was the prompt?
Yeah, just quick intro and one kind of technology trend that you have an opinion about, whether it be favorable or negative.
My name is Nick Turner. Currently work as a product manager for a little startup called InfoAct. Our product's called Flipora, so you might have seen some recent press on Flipora. That was us. I started off working at a tech incubator, so that was a lot of fun. I got to kind of see both sides of the table and a lot of different technology trends that are out. As far as trends that I have a strong opinion about, I've got a lot of mixed opinions. I'm actually going to share a more controversial stance. It's kind of one that I saw Peter Thiel hold up an iPhone and go, "This is not innovation," and just about how much of even our attention, being tech professionals, ends up in the same areas where it seems like they're highly innovative. It's weird. They seem to be slow and fast at the same time. So that would be sort of the whole social, local, mobile kind of space. And I don't know. I'd like to see more innovation, things like SpaceX and these bigger ideas kind of taken off. That's me. That's where I stand.
Can I go next?
Of course, man.
Okay, because I want to build off of that. So my name is Maurice. I am a recent entrant to Google. I'm working in people operations, which is basically like back-end HR, but for me it's an opportunity to grow my technical skills. I came from a software startup called Quid, which does sort of mathy, graph theoretic network visualizations, and specifically about tech trends. So it collected text about companies and investment information, and playing that over time, you can see clusters of technology growing and who's investing in what spaces, where they're investing, and some of the most important companies would be companies that sat between clusters. So that also gave me exposure to a lot of the types of startups that are getting funding. And like what Nick said, I'm kind of critical about a lot of the mobile development, especially in gaming, because I'm not seeing it yielding any results that are, well, that I appreciate. I think that gaming for gaming's sake is a big industry, and that's fine, but I'm not seeing an outlet that improves people, and maybe it's making people strategic or improving their reaction times. I don't know, but I would like to see some better application of that. And then, actually, you mentioned SpaceX, so I've in the past 2 days been thinking about how instead of going to space, we need some sort of low-altitude personal flying devices. Like, before we go to space, we ought to be able to fly at 20 feet above the ground and skip the traffic.
Rocket pack.
Yeah, I mean, we've flown airplanes. We got to be able to fly individuals in some sort of cheap and quieter way. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Very cool. Thank you. And Andrew, can you hear us now?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Welcome. How about you go next?
All right, sure. So yeah, I work at shopzilla.com. So I'm like a senior software engineer, and I work on like traffic acquisition applications, so SEO and SEM. So lately I've been working with Hadoop a lot, kind of mining data out of logs and finding new ways to gather log streams of interesting data. And more lately it's turned into using Hadoop to scale processes around that. So how do we predict what's going to get better SEO benefits, or with how can we optimize our ROI from SEM bidding, stuff like that. So I've been really interested in mining social data and stuff lately, and from a business perspective, I'm excited that more and more of your data is connected with things like OAuth and Facebook Connect and Twitter OAuth integration. Like, other applications can kind of get a lot of your data, and so on the one hand, it's like the data scientist in me is excited to mine this data and maybe produce useful things from it. But on the other side, I'm pretty concerned for like end user privacy, that who's invading your privacy, and are you really explicitly giving them permission to do this? So I'm kind of interested in that trade-off.
That's interesting. Chris, thanks for joining.
Yeah, sorry for being late. But
No, not at all. So we're just going around and quickly doing a quick intro and just then one technology trend that you have an opinion on, whether it be positive or negative. So if you just want to chime in on that, I guess. Parth,
Cool.
you want to go, Parth?
yeah, definitely.
Or Chris, yeah. Go for it, Chris.
All right, cool. So yeah, my name's Chris. Quick intro would be I work at Google with John. I'm actually in marketing, but I started a few web applications and do some coding on the side. But in terms of the technology I'm interested in, I would say I really love this trend of, there's two trends I really like right now. The first one would be replacing back ends just for innovation. There's a couple different companies in specific I'm thinking of, like Get Clever, that's been on TechCrunch a couple times recently. And basically what they're doing is old student information systems were used in schools, and the way it worked was companies like Blackboard would create crappy softwares to and utilize this data. And so what they were doing is saying, okay, well, we'll take the school's data, put it in the cloud, and allow for a JSON API to basically allow you to any app developer to develop different applications on this, and these applications can be used by any school using this cloud API. So you see that with Get Clever, you're seeing that with Twilio, with phone systems, you're seeing that with Swipe for credit cards. So I think this idea of taking these crappy backends and making them into cloud APIs that any developer can access the way they access any other APIs is very powerful wherever it goes. So that's a big one. And then the second one is crowdsourcing high-level tasks. So there's things like Mechanical Turk and TaskRabbit where we're having people simple stuff. I'm really interested in that. There's a startup called Kaggle where they're actually having data scientists get on and try to attack these big data sets that organizations are releasing. And so actually crowdsourcing high-level skills instead of the basic ones.
That's awesome. Addison, how about you?
Sure. Just my machine's being kind of funny. Can everyone hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
Get a nod from John. Yeah, cool. So my name's Addison Huddy. I work at Visa. I do product development for them there, kind of on the product office side. I started out in their rotational program, just kind of going throughout the organization, learning the payments business. And then I jumped out of that program and joined their information product group. And we're trying to monetize our data in different ways. And the thing that I spend most of my time working on is a offers platform, an advertising platform that's driven off of payment data. So I work with big data sets to try to customize and tailor offers for Visa cardholders. I guess I've heard two trends, and I don't want to kind of dominate it with this whole data trend that we're all talking about. So one thing that I think was originally brought up was, sorry, the JavaScript stopped working. I think we're back. The first trend I saw was kind of the Valley isn't solving for big social problems, and I think we're wasting a lot of our talent. So that's the first trend that I would love to see. I mean, there's efforts kind of coming out of places like Singularity University where they're taking really smart people, putting them through a 10-week boot camp, and then trying to create a company that can actually solve a really large problem. So that's the first trend that I kind of see picking up. The second one is the use of data to create new products. I think that we figured out how to store large data clusters, and we can even do it in real time with things like Storm and Cassandra now, but I think the next move is taking all that data and actually turning it into a customer and a consumer or enterprise-facing product. And I think that's where some of the kind of data science companies like MetaMarkets or even Splunk are going to go and try to actually create real products that people can use. DJ Patil, the data scientist in residence at Greylock, released a free ebook this week called Data Jiu-Jitsu, talking about this very topic. So it's a cool topic these days, and it'd be cool to talk about later on.
Sorry, what did you say that was called?
It's called Data Jiu-Jitsu. And it released like I think yesterday or the day before, and he's given talks on it before.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Like the art of making good data products or something, right? I think I just got sent that by someone.
Yeah, it's definitely got the word art in it, I think.
Right on.
Yeah, so that's interesting, and maybe let's jump off on that, because I think that there's two different ways to approach building products. I mean, I'm certainly narrowing it down a lot, but it's starting with the solution and trying to figure out who the right audience is for that. But then there's also the kind of the problem-driven approach to building products. And I think a lot of what people say is build products that solve problems. But when you kind of come at it from the other perspective with like the big data context, it seems like you already kind of know what types of you already kind of have a solution almost, and you're trying to find the right application for it. So Andrew, what do you think about that? Like, how do you kind of work backwards when you already have a big data set and try to figure out what do you want to do with it?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was kind of just thinking about, right? Like, I mean, a lot of my experience is in advertising, right? So you have all this data about user activity. I mean, I don't know. One thing I've been interested lately is kind of identifying experts just in every field and kind of like letting people get mentored by them or something. So, I mean, when you have all this activity, like, I guess, statistics about extracting knowledge. So, I mean, I guess part of it is figuring out what the knowledge you can / want to extract is. I don't know. I mean, Addison, what kind of like data sets were you talking about gathering?
So what I deal with primarily, it's all payment data. So it's every time you use your Visa card, we get some interesting piece of information about your, I don't know, we call them consumer lifestyle behaviors at Visa. Mm-hmm. That's what I deal with, and you're right, John. When you say with big data, you kind of have to know what you're looking for right now. I mean, there's all kind of tools out there from people like Datamir and I mean the MetaMarkets, I mentioned that earlier, where you can take these large data clusters and you can manipulate them, but you have to know what you're looking for to even find it because they're just so big. But I would love to see a startup or a large company even do it, like a place like Palantir do it, or Palantir do it, where you kind of get surprised. You find something that you didn't know you were looking for, and then you go build a product based off of that.
Yeah. Well, and Mo, you were kind of talking about earlier, again, doing a lot of this kind of social data clustering and trying to find these interesting like applications of it. Like, where does that kind of fit into this whole debate?
So an interesting thing that happened at Quid was we were thinking that we could do valuation data, and by taking the investment trajectory of companies that did exit either by acquisition or IPO, that you could use that to model what a startup would be valued at any point in its like whatever stage of life of it that it had. But it's actually very difficult because it's still extremely sparse. So in terms of having a big data set and choosing what to look for, or having a goal, even with a goal, sometimes the data doesn't support it. So we were looking for valuation, and the project got canned because after 7 months it wasn't doing anything, or we just couldn't get results out of it. So I think, Addison, you make a good point that sometimes you can have an intuition about where you want to go, and having that with a very complex data set is very important because you can't test every permutation between every feature in your data set. But you also need to be, if you expect success, you need to be working with a data set that is large enough, which in many cases is a challenge that people face, because there aren't too many problems for which there's a lot of data. And maybe the next challenge is, if there is a really important problem, then maybe we need to set up means to collect more data about it. Or maybe that's the company. It's like you make sure that there are avenues or sensors or something that you can start to build that data set.
Interesting. Yeah. And so, Parth, what do you think? Because you kind of come at this from a different perspective a little bit. Like where's your take on this, and from maybe some of what you're seeing at VMware or just in general?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I guess Addison mentioned about just collecting big data. I don't know if you guys have heard of this site of the service called 23andMe, and it kind of basically allows you to do your own genetic analysis. So they send you a kit home where you can send back a sample of your saliva or something, and then they analyze your DNA, and then they give you personalized results based upon your DNA analysis, that what's your ancestral background, that from where did your forefathers come along. And one of the cool things about it is that it kind of clusters similar DNAs of different people together and tries to see that people with this kind of DNA had this kind of diseases or problems historically, and so you might be exposed to that kind of problems in the future as well. So that, I think, is very helpful, and such kind of things were not possible 5 to 10 years back. Now, with so much genetic data available, and with the technology to mine and kind of cluster that data, this is one of the very cool applications that you can be careful from a very young age, and you can predict that hey, I could have this, I could have a heart problem, or I could have this medical problem in the future. You can already take precautions. And I think this is a very cool application.
What? Yeah.
So to add more color to that, I have a little anecdote about 23andMe. My girlfriend, who's in the other room, she works at Stanford in a genetics lab, and she works with 23andMe, and she works with athletes. So they take Stanford athletes, they run their genome at a particular point. They look for a marker, and they can actually tell if you're prone to ACL tears. And then if they are, they put them on a special regimen to make sure they don't tear. So really, really cool. Really cool.
I was hoping they genetically engineered Andrew Luck, but
they probably did.
Was good,
they probably did.
Yeah, and Nick, you kind of, I don't know, you come at this from a different perspective, right? I mean, from my understanding is Inflax is in itself a pretty significant big data company, right? And that you're kind of trying to make the process of discovering cool content from across the web easily digestible and accessible to your customers.
So we've got a lot of data. Now I think earlier, I think it was Addison who said, sometimes we have the data now. I think you got to start though with a question. You got to start with somewhere, an angle to approach the data to really get anything useful out of it. That's kind of where we're at right now. So right now, in looking for interesting content, we can either look at just what's the most popular. We're also starting to look at maybe how the players individually kind of affect each other. Are there things like social mavens out there? Are there things like salespeople? Are these just anecdotes in a Malcolm Gladwell book, or are these the kind of things that you can really see in the data in a way that, one, you need enough data, two, you need good data, and no matter what, anything you do online is going to be based on a large amount of data. There will be the law of large numbers, but a lot of times statistical significance is a little bit harder to get and kind of even a tough idea to wrap your head around. But I think you definitely, the tools are getting better. I do like the idea of anybody being able to do a little bit more analysis and sort of take on data firsthand instead of taking, you know, secondary and tertiary sources of processed and reprocessed data. I think that's actually really interesting, you know, down to the level of your own genome. Even there's no good tools to see, you know, there's clout to see if you're somewhat influential and it thinks, you know, I'm influential about some random topic that I talked about maybe once. But, you know, actually one of the ideas I was playing with was something more like a personal social dashboard where you can actually look at, you know, certain metrics on your social data, like who in LinkedIn is hiring for this type of job. I got a buddy who's looking. Instead of having to do a lot of manual searching or having to spend, you know, I'm not the best programmer, so, but trying to dig through all the API and all that, just making that a little bit easier. More personal ways to use data firsthand, I think, is a really interesting way the market could go. And I think that was actually something Addison said earlier, the idea of these data things going straight to consumer.
Definitely. Now here, this to kind of stir the pot, perhaps. So kind of a lot of what we've been talking about is, again, a lot of this technology that you use to either, you know, mine this data, store this data, retrieve this data, are all starting to almost become commoditized, right? To Chris's point earlier, a lot of these kind of back-end processes or platforms are becoming things that there's, you know, you can go and find the right SaaS to achieve your need. But then kind of tying it back to Nick, what you said earlier, it's like, at what point does that just, you know, does this just become almost like the layer on top of that where this innovation is occurring? And almost then, what is next, right? Like,
what do we do with that?
Yeah, for how long is this application or this question of what do we do with our data, how long is that going to be what's considered innovative? Because I think it certainly is right now because nobody's doing it really well. But once there are maybe 5 examples of companies that are, you know, really kicking ass with this, what else is there?
So can I extend that?
Yeah.
So I see that as the industry is building its ability to diagnose problems, but then eventually there needs to be a treatment. So right now we're doing this for like commercial purposes in order to, the treatment being to sell someone the right thing. But I wonder what other applications, what other treatments are going to be the result of this new analytics. It's like, so we have some business in creating the diagnosis of the situation of who our customers are, of what we should sell them, but what else is on the treatment end? What else is going to respond to all this new analytics?
So, yeah, I mean, what do you think about that, Chris?
Can you clarify?
I think you froze a bit.
What you mean by?
So I was thinking, think about it in terms of bioinformatics.
Yeah.
I think that
can you just
start
clarify
with
what you meant on the
consumer?
treatment? Sorry.
Is Chris trying to talk?
Oh no, I think he's a little.
Cool. So if you
No,
think
I'm good. You got it.
If you think about it in terms of bioinformatics, for example, you have the, I think that what's starting now for consumers, big data in order to sell stuff, to find analytics, to sell the right thing to the right customer. That's fine, and you'll sell it. From a bioinformatics perspective, you can study the genome, and then once you know who's susceptible to what, you'll have to develop treatments or the right preventative care for that person, or if they're going to have an issue with some chromosome, you have to be able to go in and fix the chromosome. So from a bioinformatics point, the medical treatment, I think, is more explicit. So beyond bioinformatics and medical therapies that will respond to this analytics, what other industries, what is the equivalent to that treatment that we get after all of this wonderful new analytics? Is it just going to be to sell people the right stuff?
God, I hope not. Hey, just move on from me. I'm hopping in and out.
Okay.
I can't hear. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, it's kind of like what's the kicker, right? You know, it's you know, you can do this really awesome clustering and kind of find these really awesome you know, models that basically, you know, tell the story that you want them to tell. But then again, how do you, beyond just, you know, real-time processing or making this analysis something that's very clear to the end user, it's like, how do you tie that to an actual outcome, right? Like, how do you use that to design, you know, to be persuasive, right? How do you change people's actions based on the fact that you have this new insight for them?
I saw a really interesting article last week, and this is a pretty controversial topic, but this is an example. I mean, you look at a large company, and you think about what a lot of middle management does, and they do a lot of the reporting. They take information, and they synthesize it up to upper management, which can be digested incredibly quickly, and then they can get, you know, the 10,000-foot view of what the company is doing. If I was an executive and I had the tools to look at lots of information that was synthesized in real time, I could probably thin out my organization a lot quicker or make faster decisions. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if I'm a like if I had real-time sales information about what was going on, if my CRM tool is able to, you know, look through all the data that's going on, and I knew exactly what was the most hot-button negotiation that's going on right now, and I could make a phone call to the CMO to make sure the deal goes through, you know, I think that's an interesting application for it.
Mm-hmm. Something kind of related that I saw today that you guys might find interesting was Progressive did a little thing where you could put this little dongle in your car and it gave them back real-time data. And right now they've got, I think it was about 5 billion miles worth of data. And it basically just figured out how fast you're going and how hard you stepped on the brakes and then a couple other things. And they were going to offer real-time pricing. So they promised that your price wouldn't go up, but if you were a good driver, your price might go down. But it just kind of plays with that idea of maybe one day every offer you get, even in a store, could be so tailored to you that it's more like, hey, guy just took one off the shelf, demand just went up, you just saw it, the next one's now worth extra $2 or whatever. But anyway, I just read that today. Relevant to the discussion.
That's interesting. I mean, that's a valuable application in the sense that people create models which, by virtue of it being a model, is smoothing out the differences between people. And you can actually give someone a better value. You wouldn't have to overcharge the people who are under your average if you knew exactly what they were doing. You could give them the price based on their specific behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's a bit of a trend here, right? Like, most of us, when we talk about big data, we're talking about advertising optimizations or sales, and it's like, you know, the big companies are the ones who are actually capable of doing big data right now, right? But if you look at like 23andMe or this Progressive dongle, you know, it's starting to manifest itself where like the end user can actually sort of see into this data or benefit from it or see the aggregation of it, right? Like, so I kind of wonder what other verticals this can get applied to, right? Like, I was in Singapore recently, and they're kind of like a technocracy, and so they do pretty crazy, pretty radical technical stuff that, on a governmental scale, that like we probably wouldn't do here. Like, an example is every car there has this thing, this like $10,000 device stuck to the dashboard, and every overpass you drive under, it kind of measures and bills you. And so if you drive into downtown at night, it costs maybe a few cents. But if you drive during rush hour, it costs you like more than taking a cab, or take way more than taking public transportation. So it's sort of like a coercion measure to like taking advantage of big data to smart price stuff and, you know, encourage people to not, you know, drive during rush hour or whatever. So I kind of wonder, like, that got me thinking of like, what would it take for that to happen in America? You know, probably a lot. But I wonder if there's other kind of useful applications where, you know, the average person benefits from big data. And it seems like that's starting to happen, but it hasn't really gotten there yet, you know?
Yeah, and it's, you know, I think there's a lot of these kind of quantified self apps are starting, at least trying to go that direction. Like I know the Eatery, for example, so they're owned by this company called Massive Health. And their whole basically charter is they've built this iPhone app that is really good at incentivizing and encouraging you to take pictures of the food that you eat. And then instead of rating it based on calories, you rate it based on like how fit to fat it is. So 0 to 10 scale. But then what happens is they crowdsource the ratings of that food so that within about 20 minutes or about 15 minutes, people have also rated your food. And they don't see themselves as an app company. They consider themselves a big data company. And the kinds of things that they're starting to be able to tell are like, okay, well, on average, people will rate their own food 15% higher than other people will rate it. Or food that has, you know, 4 colors in it is, you know, 20% better for you or more fit for you than this other. So it's like, I could see it starting to happen there, but again, it's like, it doesn't change the way that I do things. And I think that's...
John, I still can't believe that people are waiting on there to rate food. When you pulled that out,
yeah,
I was like,
yeah,
what is going on?
Hey, some people just, I guess, are really into the UX.
Yeah, you just got to rate that food sometimes on your own lunch break. I don't know if this has already been discussed, but I wanted to just I just wanted to hop in and say I don't know. I knew we were discussing genomes before, but I also think if you just think about the different. I was reading an article today about how this could apply to crime. If you know the areas where most likely there's going to be burglaries or car thefts, so I forget where it is. It's close by. It's somewhere in the Bay Area. It might be Santa Cruz, where the police department's actually using big data to predict where crimes are most likely to happen and staffing their police officers there in those neighborhoods and just waiting for it at certain times. So they'll know they were saying, like in the article, it's a 5% more chance than average from 2 to 4 p.m. that there's going to be a burglary in this neighborhood. So they go and they actually staff an officer.
So
if you even go beyond that to even beyond crime, and think about even just.
I was going to say, what kind of is that big data or is that just
exactly.
It's a company called Predpol.
Yeah.
Predpol,
yeah. And they have this historical government data of all the crimes that have been created in a specific area, and they were working with a professor at UCLA, right, Addison? To like basically in our math department, I think, to create these really ridiculous, just kind of like prediction algorithms to figure out like how that data actually makes sense.
It's all probability in the end.
Yeah.
Data is all probability.
Yeah. Because that's the thing, right? Is at what point?
What if you applied this stuff to? Sorry, John.
No, go for it, Chris.
I was just thinking, what if you apply this stuff to schools? If you can identify students really early on that need to be on different tracks. This is actually scary as well. It's like preventative bad teaching and learning, but knowing where the student's going before they actually head down that path and really start struggling and actually putting them on the path.
One of the points that I wanted to make was that, I mean, sometimes the line between kind of big data and just data is very blurry. I mean, it's very hard to say that what is big data, like as Chris mentioned, the cops using the data for crime detection, I hardly doubt if that's in petabytes. So what do you call big data? And so a lot of times people use big data just as a buzzword, but it's not actually big data. I think the companies that obviously internet companies definitely have that scale. One of the other areas where big data is really being applied is by the defense organizations and the security agencies, secret services, FBI and CIA and the other secret services. They have every record about where are you flying, and and they kind of they do pattern matching between where you have been traveling and where their suspects have been traveling. And so that is like real massive scale data processing when you are talking about hundreds of millions of people and information about each of them, which could be in gigabytes. So you can multiply, let's say, 1 gigabyte by hundreds of millions, and that's the scale they're processing the data at. So just wanted to bring out the differences between the scale of the data.
I think that's a really good point. I think it's not so much big data. I mean, great, we're talking about like multiple nodes and petabytes and all this stuff. I just think it's better data.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just better data, and there's new methodologies of processing.
Yeah.
I think the size has to do with the need to have distributed computing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it
And
seems
on
like
top of that, there's machine learning, which is guessing things. It's not just the sample probability is this. It's trying to do prediction based on it. So
yeah,
my view
absolutely.
of big data is there's first distributed because it's too much to fit in memory or on one computer, and then prediction.
Yeah. I mean, the funny part about the size of the data is that the technology that can be used to analyze a data set of, let's say, 100 gigabytes would be absolutely useless to analyze a data set of, let's say, 1 petabytes. So you have to completely rethink how would you store, how would you serve, and what kind of algorithms would you use in order to analyze the data. So that's where the fun part comes in. And as the data sets keep on growing in size, that's where computer science has to kick in and keep on scaling the algorithms and just keep on scaling the infrastructure needed to store the data.
Is there like an official definition of when medium data becomes big data?
I think 5 years back, even 100 gigabyte data was big data, but now that definition is shifting, right? So because now we have more and more processing. I mean, we have more sophisticated ways of processing that data. So now 100 gigabits data is not big data. It's very normal to have that data. So, and probably 5 years from now, we would have very efficient technology to process even 500 petabytes of data. So yeah, the definition keeps on changing.
So here
the problem is you get a lot of crap with that too.
Yeah.
Like for every I don't know 100, and it's growing in a disproportional way. I mean, good data is probably still growing like this, but crap data that you can't really distinguish between the two is growing like that, and you got to be able to parse out the two. That's the reason why it's growing so fast. I mean, what are you really going to learn from a shitty 1-minute weblog?
But by crap data, do you mean like semi-structured data or just things that aren't relational?
No. I think we're moving to the point where it doesn't have to be relational. I think it just means there's a lot of, I don't know, just white noise out there that's being generated. And when you hear the claims that, last year, or you say that last year more data was generated than the last 10 years prior to it on the web, that's mainly due to things like YouTube videos and social networks and weblogs and stuff that, I mean, Call Me Maybe was a great video and it went viral, but what can I learn from that? What cool product can I make from all that? So,
what's interesting is like where are new data streams going to pop up, right? Like the population's only growing so fast and people can only make so many YouTube videos, right? But like at what point does data start coming out of the real world, like embedded network sensing type stuff, right? Or
I think that's got huge potential. Like what Nick was mentioning earlier about sensors and progressive car insurance. It's like the more sensors you have, the more value you're going to create.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
as soon as, I don't know, the face of the iPad has a heat sensor or like some other kind of...
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think with mobile devices becoming so so popular and with so many people, I think we're going to see the crowdsourcing of data collected through sensors a lot in the coming next years. So let's say, for example, I want to know, I'm a medical researcher and I want to know what's the average blood pressure of men in the ages between 25 and 30 in the United States. Now, currently, there is no way to find that out. What's the average blood pressure? But with mobile phones and available smart accessories, that's going to change. I'm already seeing very portable medical devices that you could connect very easily with your iPhone, like devices to measure your blood sugar level, your blood pressure level, all those kind of stuff. And those are going to become more and more portable. So I think we should be able to collect. We should be able to collect more data from a broader set of people in the future.
So what I wonder with that is, like, obviously there's huge benefit to the individual for that right now, but I wonder about, like, it's sort of like the survey bias, right? Like, at what point, when you want to get a picture of, if you want to answer the question, what's the average blood pressure of a male in the United States, like, you kind of run into this sample bias problem, right? Like, there's a certain type of people that are more predisposed to installing apps and checking their blood pressure, and there's some people that just don't give a shit, right? So I kind of wonder, at what point is there going to be, like, a policy change to start collecting data like this, right?
Let's start with those people. That'd be fine.
I think that's also the point where data has to come with some kind of indicator for confidence. Like, how is there a built-in sample bias? If we're looking for between 24 and 36, males, does the sample fit that? And it also lends itself to what you were saying earlier, Andrew. I mean, the way they're going to get that data is people are going to download a free app. But what free really means is they're getting all of their biometric data put into this. Sorry, I just heard what sounded like the ocean. But like every time I see a free app and it's got it is connecting with my OAuth, I know all that means is, hey, it's free, but what we're going to be doing is collecting all your information. Then it comes to me to make a decision. Well, how long has this company been around? How much do I trust them? I'm sure the founders are good, but what happens if the company sells? Then what happens to my data? Those kind of things irk me a lot, and it's driven me to making a bunch of different emails for everything to make myself slightly harder to trust. But
do you think that data can be owned? I mean, now obviously most people would say yes, but think about, John's data, right? I mean, okay, I have probably 15 or 20 different sites have some snippet of my traces across the web, and it's pretty concentrated in those sites. But it's like, the aggregate of that is some piece of who I am as a person. But does it make sense for each of those to own it, or is it something that's kind of like, is it bigger than that? Yeah, do you think that it can be owned, or is this whole like notion of the semantic web kind of moving towards this open data model?
Like, how would it help America's obesity problem if everyone's the eatery data or everyone's Fitbit data, which is made public online, right? And I mean, on the one hand, you feel like, people might start to just like antagonize people who are bad at this stuff and say, hey, you're raising your health insurance premiums. But on the other side, you think that like it might be pretty useful if some entity could go through and analyze this data and do something useful. Ocean again, it sounds like.
So, yeah, that's the biggest risk, right, with health data, that you have very serious points in one's life where if that data is made available, you might be discriminated against based on it. So can you create a wall between, the people who are using the data to try and give you a better rate, and the people who are insuring you against certain things.
Yeah.
Like, I would be willing to pledge my data. You know what I mean? Like, if I could put each of my 10 data sets that matter about whatever, right, and make that, you know, and then obviously the join would simply be my ID, you know, just John, right? Like, I think that'd be awesome. I don't know if there's a forum that exists for that yet, where you're just the pure benefit to the end user is, hey, I'm putting this out there simply hoping that somebody can find something cool with it.
There's a really interesting project called OpenPass, and it was actually done by the New York Times, where if you look at iPhone data and kind of where you travel, this OpenPass is you put it on your phone and it basically tracks where you go. So it's returning location-based data on your phone back to the user, which is a big premise for database products. Like, you need to provide some type of value of the data directly to the consumer immediately. But the other problem is when you sign up for this, other people can ask you permission to have the data as well. But they have to ask you, and they have to tell you what they're going to use the data for. And more often than not, the requests that I get are for pure customer marketing, and they're just going to try to target me with ads. So, you know, is it worth it to give up that kind of data if you're going to be A, discriminated against, and B, just marketed the hell out of?
I mean,
I think it really do you think, John, do you think that you really need to anonymize it? Do you need to hide behind something? Or can you be John?
I'm not sure. I
Well,
mean,
what does anonymize mean?
yeah, it's like, you know, you can hash any PII, right? You could not include in theory, you know, like Google Analytics, right? You can see stuff all kind of at a user level, but you don't know who that user is. And I don't know. I mean, I think that the biggest challenge to adoption at this point is you know, strong-arming the companies who have this data to actually get them to open it up, right? It's like, for me, like, I can go through 5 apps on my phone who have some segment or some slice of, like, my health data, right? But I can't access it unless it's through their front end. So I don't know. That's kind of my frustration with that. But I don't know. I mean, I guess, you know, what Google says, right, is, you know, they were trying to make advertising more relevant, right? That's so much of why, you know, it's just a cash cow, is because it uses your personal data to make the ads that you see very, very relevant to who you are. So it's like, on that front, I can see, you know, I can argue maybe it is okay if they do know that I'm jrmlanovich@gmail or whatever. But like, if it increases the number of crappy ads that I get, I wouldn't be that stoked.
Yeah.
You know,
sorry, as a side note, I mean, if you guys want to look at kind of people doing altruistic work with big data sets, you got to look at what Todd Park, he's the CTO of the United States. He's doing some really, really cool stuff. So, you know, that altruism that comes with big data products probably is going to come from the government.
Interesting. Yeah, it's like, I know, you know, Palo Alto, for example, they've completely opened their city data set, or San Francisco has followed suit. You know, it's kind of
Portland.
Yeah, and they're trying to, and again, it's funny because it kind of plays back into that social, local, mobile kind of bubble almost, and that's like, well, we have all this hyperlocal data, so let's just make a really, really minute focus Foursquare. You know, it's just that it's like, you know, how you apply that in ways that are novel, I think is going to be pretty cool. But I don't know. Like, Chris, one of the things that we've kind of had an open dialogue about is, again, is how you. It could just be to take this data from one data set, but again, in the context of what I'm talking about is like LinkedIn, right? And you could take this data set from LinkedIn, but apply it in a way that's just completely new. But it's like, at some point, you guys think that companies that are built off of other company data can ever be successful? Because ultimately, like, you could just close the doors and it's done.
Isn't Zynga an example of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem with the idea we were talking about with LinkedIn. It's those walled gardens. And if you look within companies, even at something like Google, think about how long it's taken to get to Google now. And I think once they pull it all together, even the walled gardens internally will start to break down. Google's going to come up with an awesome product, but it's taken this long, right? And that's just internally within a company. And then you imagine with trying to get us, governments are willing to open up their data, but in terms of getting data from elsewhere, it's going to be these walled fiefdoms where it's going to be hard to access. And so I think you build a product that generates a ton of data. So you could imagine a analytics sensor company for the real world. They'll generate a ton of data, and they'll probably build a lot of products off data, but they'll be very protective over how other people are.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think for a lot of these private companies like LinkedIn, they wouldn't be very comfortable sharing or opening up their data, because for them the data that they have collected is their primary competence, right? I mean, if you imagine LinkedIn without all the data that they have, LinkedIn is nothing. LinkedIn is just it is about the data they have, and I think they have done a fantastic job in kind of making that data useful for normal people, for consumers. Like if you buy a LinkedIn Pro account, then you can see what are the queries that people are doing in order to land on your profile. Or you can also see the top 5 queries like for that recruiters do, like whether it's HTML5 or PHP or Java, etc. And then you can actually use that data to probably navigate your career or something like that. So, but I think LinkedIn and other private companies like Google wouldn't be. I don't see them opening up their data. I think that has to come from some nonprofit or like probably the government or universities or something like that. Which don't make money out of that data.
It's like we even saw that in the hackathon, right? Remember with that shopper, like we for context, Parth and I were part of a team that built basically a on top of the Twitter API to try to connect buyers and sellers on Twitter, and we had to work. Even right after the hackathon, work extremely closely with Twitter and also Gannett to just like make sure that we were doing something that they were completely comfortable with. And again, this was at no scale whatsoever. But it's like, again, if they're not figuring out ways of monetizing their data, they certainly don't want to, enable other people to do the same thing.
I mean, I wonder if crowdsourcing is going to be the best way for this to happen. Like, I mean, earlier you were talking about kind of like. Earlier you were talking about like, what if there's some way that people could just opt in to opening up their data, like the organ donor box on your driver's license form, right? Like, I mean, to a certain extent, I was thinking about that specifically with respect to Chris's thing about like employment and school preferences, right? Like, if you could identify people that are going to have trouble getting into college, or trouble, learning science or whatever, and at a certain point, I wonder if like, everyone's education profiles were just made available on like an anonymized basis or something like that. Like, it seems like they'd be able to make pretty intelligent policy decisions, right? And I doubt even the government could access pretty granular data about people's education histories and stuff, right? At least, I mean, I'm pretty interested to hear about Todd Park and what he's doing with big data, but I mean, if you think about the data that's stored and kind of in local silos, right? Like, school districts probably have this stuff individually, but I doubt someone can say, hey, people in Northern California tend to do better on their AP calculus tests than people in Nebraska, so we should change something, right? Like, I don't know.
One example of big companies kind of taking those, I like the term that Chris brought up, the walled gardens. The big insurance companies have come together via a government agency, a government-backed nonprofit, who are going to take historical insurance claims, put them in a database, and they're going to open that database up to universities and other nonprofits to mine and try to. I think it's probably not going to be available for the next 2 years, but I mean, you have Cigna and Aetna both coming to the table and saying, let's put our data together on an anonymized basis in one database that we can derive insights from, because we need them. I mean, that's a company. Those are companies reaching out saying, there's a huge problem. We internally can't figure out the answer, so we need your help.
I mean,
so.
Sorry, Addison.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm done.
I mean, Mo, like, what do you think this is going to look like? Because I feel like there's kind of three models that we've talked about, right? There's the one that it starts at the kind of almost the government level, right, or some kind of external party. But then I think there's also the opportunity for it to happen at the kind of company level, where companies can decide to do this. But then there's opportunity at the user level, where a user can kind of pledge this. It's like, what do you think this is going to look like?
I think that government drives a lot of this. A lot of the data that is available, say in the city data, is because we're forced to deliver that. Like, there is payment data and there is data from mobile phones, but a lot of the data of like how much we earn or where we live, that comes because the government organized it all for us.
Mm-hmm.
Or the government requires that we report on certain things. So one thing that Addison just mentioned made me think, do you think it's cheaper for these big companies, instead of developing it themselves, they just come together, they deliver the data, and they hope to acquire the people who do the most meaningful stuff with it? Like, is that
I feel like they'll still keep it closed. Like, for example, there's that platform Kaggle that's trying to do this. They're saying data scientists only work at one company. Why is that the case? So you only have Google data scientists working on their data. They should be working on everybody's if they can solve big problems. So the government agencies or whatever organization can say, hey, here's my data set. I don't know what the hell I'm doing with it. I need some help. And have 20 to 30 data scientists actually take a look, do predictive models, and then the one that they deem the most successful gets a prize. But all the while, that data remains closed.
I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think some of the innovation that they're looking for isn't necessarily from data scientists, but more comes back to that where to look problem. Like, I'm sure you guys all know the story about Target knew that. Target knew that a girl was pregnant before her dad did.
Mm-hmm.
That was because a marketer went up to the data scientist and go, hey, the only time people really switch their buying habits in life, there's only a couple key times: when they move, when they get married, when they're pregnant. So they went and said, hey, how can we figure that out? So it started off with that question. It wasn't necessarily the data scientist seeing that pattern. And then the things that they come up with aren't things that you would necessarily intuitively think of looking for. Like, it was a certain vitamin mixed with, they would switch to an unscented oil mixed with, they would buy more, paper towels or something like that. And it was those data points that ended up pointing toward a strong correlation with, them being pregnant in this thing. So I
vacuuming.
So I think a lot of what these guys are looking for is more the where to look, rather than we don't have enough data scientists necessarily to tackle the data set.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Wow.
John, where do you think it's going to come from?
I want it to come from the 7 of us, personally.
You think it's going to... What do you think the most impact is going to come from? Government, private industry, or users?
I mean, my just personal belief is I believe stuff like this kind of has to start at the user level, and then that will force the people above that to change. I mean, I don't know. Again, I think that, especially when it comes to data, and especially because of a lot of these sample biases we mentioned earlier, like, as soon as this does happen, there's going to be skeptics just coming out hardcore, just talking about every possible reason why whatever this is not true, right? You know, and I'm sure that will happen for several years before, once the technology catches up to actually enable this to happen, it will be a societal problem of actually being willing to listen to what it's saying. But I think, you know, in my perspective, you can change that by even just starting to do it. If I were to, pause and go to a site, right? Almost something like about.me, right? About.me knows, functionally they can join me across maybe 7 or 8 places. But then if you were able then to take that data that's beyond those places and then actually like create this horizontal data set, I'd be very interested to see, even at just a personal level, like what could I see about, you know, to Nick's point earlier, like a personal social analytics dashboard of like, oh wow, I tweet a lot after I get a lot of comments on my Facebook, or I'll post a video that does really well on Google Plus, and then I'll do something else somewhere else. You know what I mean? And I think these causalities and even just pulling that out at the personal level will start to kind of make people realize and ask these questions at a bigger scale than just the 7 months.
But users don't deliver their information because they want to. They often deliver, and most of the time deliver their information because someone's asking them to.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
the driver, I think, is from the private industry. Like, we're okay with it. We're getting even more okay with it as time goes on. But we're not just putting our data out there, like, hoping that it'll get used well. It's kind of, sometimes it's just used and then the private companies apologize. Most of the time the private companies are like, give. And we do.
Yeah, I don't know. I want this open standard, right? The semantic web.
Yeah, I think just as I'm just trying to draw an analogy with the open source software movement, you know, where you contribute something in expecting that you will gain benefits from the community as a whole. And so if a similar kind of an open data movement could take off, that where, you know, people would get comfortable sharing their, you know, data in order to solve bigger social problems. So, and if we can build a community around that data of, you know, let's say data scientists and other organizations who would use your data, not for profit, but actually to do, you know, actually to do some social good. Maybe solve medical problems, maybe do something else. But if we can actually, you know, develop that trust in people that, you know, your data will be used for something good, then, you know, it might take off. Yeah.
What do you think it takes to standardize that? You know, like, it seems like there's all these companies. You know, you have like medical companies, education companies, governments, schools. Like, there's all these places that have your data, and it sounds like what all of us are saying is like, hey, give it to us. You know. So I wonder if there's some way to like, standardize like how they release that data to you, or B, standardize how you anonymize and publish that data, right?
Yeah.
So, sort of like an about.me for everything.
Right.
Well, you know how there's a mandate with your healthcare records that when you go to your physician, you have to say like, oh, give me my healthcare records, all the stuff you just wrote down. Often that physician will charge you like 10, 15, 20 bucks to do that. But you know, you get mailed a copy of all your medical records that you have. And the same concept would be really interesting, where you could mandate that all the data that Facebook had on you was sent to you in its raw format. I mean, I think, you know, 99.999% of the population doesn't care, nor would they even know what to do with it. But I think it would be nice to know that you had it and you owned it and it was there.
Yeah, well,
I think there was something where they had to export your data if you asked for it. I think they got into some kind of trouble for that. They did have to give you all your data.
And
It would be interesting though to ask them for it in a printed form. But going back to your point of standards, reminded me of an XKCD I put in the chat box. It's basically like somebody will come up with a standard, but there will always be multiple standards.
Yeah. Well, kind of to build on that, like, you know, people can request their stuff right now, but I wonder what it would take for there to be some kind of a unified API, sort of like, I mean, this isn't the best comparison, but it's sort of like a universal way of accessing data, like what OAuth is to authentication. Like, how could there be something like that for data? I mean, have any of you guys heard of P3P? Like, it's sort of this thing where web companies have to put something in their HTTP headers telling you what kind of privacy data they're collecting. I mean, I wonder, and companies literally get in trouble for not adhering to that, or, you know, people's browsers will warn them that this company is collecting whatever data on you. And so I wonder, like, what it would take for there to be an API and or standard for, I mean, the structure of the data would be pretty out of control, probably a tougher problem than the semantic web, but I don't know. I wonder if it's going to get there eventually.
I mean, you could start non-structured. First of all, I think there can be a separation between certain types of extra personal information. Like, I mean, your address is out there, but your social security number and your credit card number should probably not be included in this list. I mean, right?
Fair enough.
So, I mean, there's a lot of data that I think there are different sensitivities to openness of data. Like, I'm happy to share all of my Facebook information, but I don't want to be publishing my phone number and my address everywhere. And I don't have those on my Facebook. But the rest, it's fine. And maybe it doesn't need to be structured, but it can be at least bucketed. So you don't need to necessarily, and I understand the advantage of having like an API-esque way of accessing it where you can index into certain pieces of information. But even just to start, like, there is Maurice, and this is all of his information. You can download it and you can try and structure it however you want, but at least everything that is Maurice Diesendruck, disambiguated to me, is there. That way you can search kind of needle in the haystack for all the users with a certain thing, and then you can decide to structure it however you want.
I mean, I can see this being very naively, right, a three-screen problem where you have, you know, user view of, I go in and I can choose one of 50 different companies who have open API standards. So I can log in with my Facebook, I can log in with my LinkedIn, log in with my Amazon for purchase history. I can log in with all these places, and then basically it just accumulates all of that around the idea of a John, right? But then on the other side, what if all of that then just went into a database that you could, you know, access via API? And then you could then just look for these trends across whatever data set you could create.
They'd have to export their data out of your site too.
Yeah. Right.
But no, seriously, I'm like on Google Takeout right now, and I know they do that for every Google product. You can just download it, and Facebook does it as well. So you're right. You can do it from a lot of these sites. A lot of the bigger ones, they've gotten their act together around easily doing this.
Yeah.
So that's kind of reverse engineering all of these big companies' walled gardens. Like, if they're required to give you your data, and if people en masse will put up their individual data, then you have, I don't know, 100 million Facebook users giving the public their data.
Yeah. I mean, the cool thing is that then that becomes a problem that we already have paradigms to understand how to solve it, right? Like, it just becomes a challenge of user adoption and building use cases. You know, you could just basically be having to get as many people to use this as possible, and then check out these two really cool applications of this developer API that lets you, do X, Y, or Z.
I think we got something.
I'm into it.
It would be wild if you got users just export their Google data and did something cooler with it. Just built a really cool app on it and just went in and showed them, hey, here's what I got. I just had about 5,000 people export their data and give it to me, and here's what I did with it.
Well, I just downloaded the Google Takeout, and Google has 1.1 megabytes of information on me. I think they got a little bit more than that. So
you're doing logged out search. You just got on Google Plus.
Yeah, this is actually, just so you guys know, this was all just a grand scheme to get Google to get more of your guys' data. Oh man. Well, so we've been going at this for over an hour, which is crazy because it certainly doesn't feel that long. But do you guys have any like kind of closing remarks or any like parting words of wisdom? I think there's definitely going to be some side conversations that emerge from this. I know, and I'm pretty excited about that. But what do you guys think about this? Was it a useful medium, a good, cool format? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool. Nice. So for the massive audience of people who will probably never see this, what do you guys think? Like, what's key takeaways from what you've heard in this last hour together?
I mean, it feels like we got new ways to collect data, but a lot of what's being done with it is commercial. So it sounds like a lot of what's kind of eating us up inside is like, how do we find a way to use this to make people's lives better, or how can the government use this at scale to make good changes? And it sounds like we have some ideas.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say, we started off with a broad question, what trends do you see? And we all kind of did end up talking for the majority of the hour about big data. So it is definitely an interesting area. The biggest things that I kind of heard in our conversation were things like who owns the data? Is it you? Is it the company? What do you want to make public or private, and how do you feel about that? And then what are more interesting things that we can do with the data, both the companies and government, both from the top down and the bottom up? What are the more interesting things that users can do with their own data, and what are the more interesting things that the bigger problems that government and corporations could be solving? So all in all, awesome hangout. Thanks for organizing this, John.
Sure thing, guys.